Okay. All right. Hopefully everybody can get in. Um, thank you for attending everything you wanted to know about blueberries. As I mentioned before, this will probably tell you everything you wanted to know about blueberries and probably a little bit extra. If you have any questions about the material as we're going through, I've muted everybody. Please go ahead and type that in the chat box if you have questions. Um, Apparently, it looks like I sent the wrong link out to those that want to. I can't do anything about that right now. Um, let's see. Yeah, still working on the volume. Okay, so going ahead, I'm going to go ahead and start this. It is being recorded, so if you if you're watching this later, I apologize if you weren't able to get in. Hopefully, you'll be able to get everything that you need to know from this video. And I do repeat these occasionally, so I will probably give this one again in the near future. All right, so again, we're just going to hit every single bit about blueberries from every angle. So, most people know they're primarily grown in North America. But since we're talking about everything about blueberries, most people don't know that that the US is the largest producer in the world. There are a lot of other countries around the world that grow them, but the US by far produces the most. And you'll see a nice infographic later. They did start out, they are native to Americas, and the Native Americans used to use them both for dyes and textiles and food colorings. And there's some other interesting facts about what the antioxidants can do to improve memory and cognition in older adults. So Bet you didn't know. And again, sometimes I repeat things because they're just kind of cool, and most people like that kind of factual information. Most blueberries are going to be blue, but there are some that are pink and some other interesting colors as well. A lot of folks know that if you eat them, you're going to be pretty regular, which they just taste good, but they're good for you also. And they can help with your cholesterol levels and blood sugar levels. So, origin. About 13,000 years ago, North America kind of had, and these are the lowbush blueberries. So, Native Americans figured out that these tasty little blueberries grew really low to the ground, and they were wonderful things to pick and incorporate into their cooking. So, they were the first ones to recognize that blueberries were a wonderful little fruit, and they used them for all sorts of things, medicinal purposes. They used them as a food source, flavorings for other things. They dried them, incorporated them into winter storage. I think believe pemmican. They use rendered bison fat and mix that in there along with other nuts and things like that. And that would be a travel food that they would use. And they believe the Great Spirit sent them blueberries from the stars to keep them healthy, which is kind of interesting. So, moving on to the domestication and commercialization of blueberries, you can see there, this is an older map, but that the US is one of the top countries in the world for blueberry production. You'll note here that this is a 2019 infographic, and that it's mostly going to be countries that have more moderate climates or have some areas of moderate climates in there. So the US, Canada, you've got some parts of Australia, South Africa, along with Peru and the Andes and areas along in there. What you're seeing here is not a lot of really hot countries or desert climates grow blueberries. They were domesticated back in early 20th century, and the two folks that were really kind of the spearhead of this was Elizabeth White and Frederick Coville. So the first successful cultivation and commercial introduction was in 1912. So it's been a while. And now you have America producing probably close to 1 billion pounds annually, which is a lot of blueberries. Personally, I like to go to the store and I'll get them. And sometimes you get off-season blueberries and they're not that great, but you can still pop them in the freezer and eat them frozen, and they're just as good, if not better, sometimes than the fresh ones that you get if they're not as great, if they're a little mealy. But folks now use them for all sorts of things, dried, fresh, frozen, and smoothies, things like that. Um, highbush blueberries are probably the most popular type of or variety of blueberry, and they're going to make up about 40% of the world's supply. So why is America number one in blueberry production? And you can see here, this is from 1992 through 2020, and you can see that the US kind of outpaces most other countries. Canada's pretty up there with them, but they definitely are, one of the tops in production. And that's because climate. There's a lot of diverse climate. You have a lot of the cooler climates that they do better in. The soils, we have a lot more acidic soils like we do here in Georgia. Research and development. UGA has been actually at the forefront of development of new blueberry varieties. Uh, a lot of the rabbiteye varieties that we grow here in Georgia come from UGA. And they're constantly leading the way in new varieties and producing disease resistant blueberries. Generally, they're pretty easy fruit to grow, but they do have some challenges, and we'll talk about that later. So genetic advancements, post-harvest technologies, and how to get more of them to market, sustainable practices, so we don't just dump chemicals on them. We use IPM and lots of health benefits. Those have been publicized over and over again, and a lot of versatility. So they are just pretty easy to grow here. They do really well, and they have a great market. So, top blueberry producers in America. Most people kind of, assume that, or maybe if you didn't know, Georgia's actually in the top three. So, I mentioned before, blueberries do really well here. There is a large commercial production of them down in the southern part of the state. And that may be a little bit different because it's warm down there, of course. And I did mention that a lot of these areas do plant and harvest highbush varieties, which northern highbush, which tend to be pretty productive and very flavorful. And those are grown in more temperate climates. But Georgia is up at the top of the stack. Number three at 97 million pounds per year. So Washington State takes the top um, number one spot, and then Oregon at 135 million, and then of course Georgia. So then you see Michigan, California, North Carolina, New Jersey, Florida, Indiana, and Mississippi down there at the bottom. So Georgia's doing really well. Blueberries are perfectly suited to the soils here. They love acidic soils. We got plenty of that. We don't have any problems at all with that. We have abundant moisture. We can do well with irrigation. They're a very easy plant to maintain. They do have a couple challenges with regards to certain types of diseases and things, but as compared to, say, peaches or apples or other types of stone fruits, um, uh, not nearly as many as that. They're an easy keeper. They're very easy to grow. Most people I know have them in their home gardens, and they're very productive. You can get a lot of pounds of fruit off of the bushes that you have. So, um, demand keeps increasing, and you can see their market demand per capita consumption has gone up 97% from between 2011 and 2021. So that's a good cash crop for a lot of folks. And you pick operations, we still have some of those around here, and they are very popular. People love to go pick blueberries. Georgia grows about 50 different varieties, actually over. So lots of ranges of flavors and harvest times. Pretty much, if you're looking for blueberries, you can plant them and get fruit between June and August, sometimes even on into early September if you plant correctly. So you can have a whole summer's worth of harvest, which is really nice. And blueberry types. So let's jump in here. So there are some major kinds that are most, I guess, typically found, and that's the northern highbush blueberry. We don't use a lot of those here. They're going to be found mostly in zones 3 to 7. Those are more temperate. Those are the ones that do better up north. So that's going to be your Washington State, your Oregon, your upper tier count, states up into Canada and all of that. And then you're going to have your southern high bush blueberries, which are going to do well kind of mid-south, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, and into the mountain areas of Georgia. Um, they're not quite as flavorful or as plentiful as the northern high bush, but you'll still find them. And then you have rabbiteye blueberries, which are mostly seen in the southeast, and that's what UGA has done a fantastic job of breeding and creating new varieties for us to use. And those are going to do the best down here in the southern states. So basically, zones 7 through 9, they can tolerate a lot more heat. They can tolerate the soils that we have. They do a lot better here. Then you have low bush varieties. That's basically a wild blueberry. So those you're going to find in Canada. You're going to find them in Maine and New England. It does say that you can find them down to zones 8, but mostly those are going to be found all the way up there in the top tier zones. Have a very intense flavor. I can remember when I was a little girl and we would go up to Canada on vacation and we would go find patches of these wild berries and we would pick them. And then all through the fall and winter and into the spring, I would go out and sneak into the freezer and take bags of these yummy frozen blueberries, and that would be my snack. And then last, you have half high blueberries. So that's a cross between production high bush, northern high bush varieties, and the cold tolerant wild low bush species variety, which is your native blueberry. And those are going to be hardy in zones 3 through 7. So, kind of all the way from Minnesota or up into parts of Canada down through into northern Georgia, basically. Growing blueberries. Okay, so considerations, and we're going to talk a little bit about chill hours and pollination, bloom time, soil type, fertilization, and maintaining plants. So some of you might be brand new to this and you're looking for all the information, and that's what you're going to get. So that kind of most of these are going to have significance to any type of fruit production, but we'll talk about specifically for blueberries. So chill hours. So chill hours are probably not something that's been on your radar if unless you're a master gardener or a really avid fruit grower of some sort. So chill hours, and you can see I've got a map here. This is going to give the typical or average chill hours that that area can expect to see at, in whatever region you're in. So that's going to refer to the amount of time a plant needs to be exposed to temperatures between 32 and 45 degrees when dormant. So dormant means winter time. So basically now. These hours are going to be crucial for that development of fruit production for that next growing season. So we typically think of chill hours occurring between November 1st and February 28th. If you don't get enough chill hours, that means that your flower buds aren't going to fully develop and you're going to have a really poor fruit set or smaller berries. You can see here we're in kind of central to southern North Georgia, and we're somewhere in the 800 to 1,000 hour range. So that means that in an average winter time, we'll get between 32 and 45 degrees. We'll get 800 to 1,000 hours of those temperatures. We've got more of that this winter. We're really cold, so I don't think we will have a problem at all on having a proper number of chill hours. So in general, those different highbush and rabbiteye varieties kind of fall into a range. So northern highbush, you're going to have 800 to, that's actually should say, well, 800 to 1,000 hours. And then southern highbush, 350 to 600. Rabbiteye, 350 to 700, probably closer to 800. If you plant a low chill hour plant in a high chill area, say that fast 5 times, it's probably going to bloom prematurely, and a late frost or freeze may result in losing your entire crop or losing a good portion of it. So in layman's terms, that means don't plant a blueberry, a southern highbush blueberry that would do really well down in Macon or down in Valdosta. Up here in Alpharetta or up in the mountains, up in, say, Blairsville, don't do that, because what happens is that particular variety of blueberry only needed maybe, say, 350 chill hours in order to break bud. And up in, say, Blairsville, you get way more than that. You're going to get probably 800, I don't know, 1,000, 1,200 hours, chill hours, because it's up in the mountains. So what's going to happen is you're going to get that bud's going to start to break and bloom maybe in, say, February. And Blairsville's not done with winter yet in February. So you're going to probably lose your entire crop because it's too cold, and it's going to get the sufficient number of chill hours it needs. And then it starts to bloom, and then it gets cold and it nips those and they die. So there's a reason why when you're ordering plants or purchasing plants at a nursery of blueberries, that you need to make sure that whatever varieties you're looking at are going to be working well for whatever area you're in. So for instance, if you purchase plants in our plant sale, I choose varieties that do well for zones 8A and 8B in Gwinnett County, because that's where we are. So they're going to have a specific set number of chill hours that are going to work for where we are. I'm not going to choose varieties that do well down in the southern part of the state, because everybody would be mad at me for choosing plants that they never get berries off of because they're constantly breaking bud too early. So chill hours is very important. If you get them from a commercial source like Pike or someplace else, or someone else, make sure that wherever you're purchasing them, whatever those varieties are going to do well for your particular part of the state or the country. Pollination. So fruit trees and bushes and all that, they're all over the map. Some are self-pollinating. Many need cross-pollination in order to produce fruit. So southern highbush, northern highbush, rabbiteye, and lowbush, they all have some self-fertile varieties, meaning they don't need cross-pollination, but most are going to require some cross-pollination, with the exception of rabbiteye, which really needs cross-pollination. And lowbush, which also requires cross-pollination, meaning you've got to have multiple varieties that bloom at the same time in order to get fruit set and high quality fruit set. So some particular types of crops are wind pollinated. For instance, corn. Corn is wind pollinated. It doesn't need pollinating insects or birds or whatever, whereas with blueberries, they do. So honeybees are pretty efficient at transferring pollen. and do a great job of setting fruit. So you'll notice if you go to a U-pick operation that they probably have a lot of hives out there because those bees are really efficient at that. And then they can sell the honey as blueberry honey. And um, that's when you basically know that your bees are getting their pollen and nectar and pollen from one particular source. So in that case, they're pretty confident they're feeding off of those blueberries, and therefore that honey is blueberry honey. You also have hover flies, and they're pretty efficient at transferring pollen. Southern blueberry bees, those are another solitary type of bee that are great at pollinating blueberries, and then bumblebees. And what they do is sonicate basically means they rumble their little bottom to knock that loose. Carpenter bees will also do some pollinating. And I know a lot of people don't like carpenter bees. They burrow into the wood, cause problems, but they are very necessary pollinators. So let's see. Bloom time. So blueberries are going to bloom in the spring, and that timing depends on the variety of the blueberry and the local climate. That's where the chill hours comes in. So some of them are going to break bud really early. It might be late February or into late March, kind of depending on where you are, all the way through early May. So warmer regions are going to have an earlier bloom, and cooler regions will have a later bloom, again, depending on the variety. So differences, so you're going to get your low bush blueberries. Those are going to be up in the northern areas of this country. March to early April is when you'll expect to see bloom, and even then, that might be too early. Sometimes you get snow into June. High bush blueberries bloom April to May, so a little bit later, and then rabbiteye are going to bloom mid-April to early May. Half high or those hybrid, those are going to bloom April to May. Right now, we're not really concerned with this cold snap. If you'll remember back a couple years ago, we had a secondary cold snap that came through. We lost a lot of our fruit crop because we did have some blueberries that were blooming at that time when we had the secondary cold snap in early April. So cold tolerance actually decreases as those blueberry flowers are growing, and then as they open and as they are pollinated, and then as the fruits are set and starting to grow. So when you have a really tight bud, basically before the bell of that flower opens up, they can tolerate fairly cool temperatures. So you can see 10 to 15 degrees. They can survive for about 6 hours at temperatures that cold. When it starts to swell and it's getting ready to open, it can tolerate temperatures not quite that cold, so 20 to 23 degrees for several hours. I would say probably 2 to 4. And then early pink bud stage, which is when they're just starting to open, about the same amount of low temperatures, but less than an hour. So that shows you as that bud begins to open, they become less and less tolerant to those colder temperatures. And we had that several years ago. Once those flowers are pollinated and they drop and you start to have the fruit that's set and growing, they can tolerate temperatures down to about 28 degrees for less than an hour, give or take. Sometimes they're a little bit more tolerant. It kind of depends on how protected your bushes are. But obviously, across the board, the more prolonged exposure you have to low temperatures, it's going to damage the fruit, and you may lose a lot of them, any of the berries. That's why I always try to encourage folks, if you're going to plant blueberries, try to put a variety of different plants that will bloom early, mid, and late, so that you've got a wide variety there. Some that haven't even started the bloom yet, that's a very tight bud, all the way through some that may have already set fruit. Those you might lose, and you might lose those that have just started the bloom process, but the ones that have a very tight bud might survive, and then you'll get later fruit than you. Meanwhile, you've lost the early fruit, but that happens. That's just part of gardening. Soils, most people know blueberries prefer acidic soil. We got a lot of that here. Our average pH in our soils is somewhere around 5.5. We've got a lot of iron. Just is what it is. But that's good because they like that. So you don't have to do a whole lot to our soils here in order to make blueberries happy, which is nice. They do provide or prefer, just a second, well-drained soil to prevent root rot. So sandy, loamy soils, which are kind of your um, go-to for gardening, are ideal. But if you have heavy clay, which a lot of us do, you're probably going to do better to amend your soils to try to improve drainage and make it easier for those roots to grow in. Or you can try growing them in a raised bed. Some people will try to do that. So they do well on a rich organic matter, so incorporating compost or peat moss, and you can get some manure in there, and they will do really well. Blueberries are heavy feeders. You really do need to fertilize them pretty regularly to get a good crop. And I always recommend doing a soil test. So they are very sensitive to salinity. Not a problem necessary here. This is probably going to be more of an issue if you're in more of a desert climate where maybe you're using water that you're pulling from a deep aquifer and irrigating, or you just don't receive a lot of rainfall, so you have a buildup of salts in your soils. But just kind of keep that in the back of your head as a note here. Fertilizing, so they prefer an acid-loving type fertilizer that you would look for azaleas. You can find a lot of them out there, both synthetic and organic fertilizers, and it usually will say something about blueberries on there. But if you just don't find that, you can also find fertilizer that's good for azaleas or anything else that says acid loving on there. So it's going to have a good 10-10-10 balance to it, which is just a good overall or garden fertilizer for vegetables or any plants, 12-12-12 or 4-8-8-8. You don't want anything too high. You just want a nice balanced fertilizer. Cottonseed meal is a good one for blueberries. A lot of times we'll have a deficiency in magnesium, so make sure that that's a micronutrient if you're growing in a raised bed, especially. We have a lot of magnesium in the soil around here, so it's usually not an issue. But if you're growing in a raised bed, it may be an issue. So just kind of keep that also as a is in the back of your head. They are sensitive to over fertilization, so don't love them too much, and avoid nitrates that are going to be in your fertilizers. They don't do very well with that. So you're going to fertilize usually right before, usually fall and then early February-ish. Our schedule is a little bit different than what you see there, but you still can follow that and be okay. You want to do it right before they bloom, and then after they've set fruit and you've picked, go ahead and give them another dose after that, and that'll help that plant replenish what it's lost in producing all of that yummy fruit that you love. You want to spread that fertilizer about 18 inches around the base of that plant so that it can come in contact with its root system, and make sure to water that in to the root zone. And of course, get your soil test. I just noticed that my soil test is reversed here. Anyway, that's a soil test. Make sure you do that at least every couple of years to kind of keep an eye on the nutrient levels. Not so much on the pH, because again, here we don't really have problems with that, but you will notice if you don't fertilize your berries, you'll start to see a decrease in the amount of production and the quality of the fruit. And that is probably because you're deficient in some of the nutrients that they need. So just keep that every 2 to 3 years rotation going in and doing a soil test in your blueberry patch, and you'll figure out based on that what you need. If you have questions, you can always reach out to Extension. We'll be happy to kind of walk you through what's going on and what you need to do. So maintaining plants, annual pruning, you're going to go in there in the winter time when they are dormant, and you're going to prune out weak canes, or not canes, weak branches, diseased branches, dead branches. You're just going to remove all of that and get that out of there. As your plant gets older, I've got some that are I don't know, probably close to 20 years old, they start to, some of the main branches and trunks are going to start to die back. So you'll want to figure out which ones you want as replacements if you like that particular plant. So you're going to encourage that new growth to come up and start removing some of the older. Monitoring those plants for pests and disease, organic control, using pesticides and fungicides as necessary, making sure to follow IPM practices, integrated pest management. We can help you with that. Healthy environment, make sure that you're pruning so you've got good air circulation. Attracting pollinators. Again, usually they're one of the very first plants that are out there blooming. So you'll note that the bumblebees and the other solitary bees are usually heavy on them when they're blooming. And that's because, again, it's one of the very first and earliest food sources. So that's usually a big thing for them. They're going to be covered up. You usually don't have a problem with pollination. Cross-pollination, always make sure that you have different varieties of blueberries that bloom at the same time. You don't have to get the same variety. You can get different ones. They just need to bloom at the same time. So you'll note on our plant sale form, we have early, mid, and late varieties. Always pick two earlies, always pick two mids, always pick two late. They've got to overlap in bloom time. Bird netting, that's up to you. I don't do that because you end up with a lot of dead birds sometimes. I just plant more, and that way the birds can eat some blueberries, and you get lots of blueberries, and everybody's happy. Weed control, make sure to do that. That goes for anything because the weeds are going to use nutrients that the blueberries would use. And soil mulch, you want to, I mulch my berries, bushes. I don't ever not mulch them. I usually put a soaker hose down there and then put the pine bark mulch over the top of it. And then that will break down and add more organic matter to the soil. So planting potted blueberry bushes, you're going to put those in the fall when the soil temperatures are nice and fairly still warm, even though we may have some cooler weather. That's going to give your roots a chance to establish. Bare root plants, you can plant those in very, very early spring, so February, March. You want to make sure that they're going to get full sun. They need pretty close to 8 hours of sun a day to be happy and do and produce those yummy berries. Make sure that that soil pH is down in that 4.5 to 5.5 range. And most people are probably not going to have a problem with sulfur, but if you're growing some blueberries near a lawn, and you've been liming your lawn, that may be an issue. So if you're trying to do some interplanting and sneak some of those in so that the HOA can't tell that you're putting them in your established, in between your established plants, know that if you're liming your lawn, you may have a bit of an issue with pH. So sometimes making sure that wherever you're planting them, it makes sense is a good thing. Don't put them in the middle of plants. For instance, don't put them in the middle of hydrangeas where you're trying to change the color to something that's not what you're going to find down here, which is blue. So you make sure that whatever you're growing is compatible with one another. Make sure you space those plants about 5 to 6 feet apart. And we do have some folks that try to grow these into hedges and have been quite successful. And you can do that and you can still pick plenty of fruit. It can be functional and, you can get some yummy blueberries to eat. That's perfectly fine too. But if you space them a little further apart, it's easier for the pollinators to get to them. And technically, even though we see them in the nursery with blueberries on them or blooms, you're supposed to kind of prune those off and rub those off, but I'll leave that up to you whether you want to do that or not. So continuing on with planting, mixing peat moss or pine bark in there. Don't apply any fertilizer at that time. That's something that you're going to do later. And obviously not lime. You really don't want to put that in there. Make sure you're kind of spreading those roots apart. These are things that you would do for any potted plant. You want to make sure that those roots can then regrow out into the soil that you're providing them. And watering well, and then make sure across the top of it after that, put some mulch down, pull it away from the trunk of the plant, and that way you don't have voles or any other little animal getting in there and munching on it. That's a good start. And make sure that you're watering as you go through that first year and a half to establish it. You need to make sure that you're continuing to water that plant. Otherwise, you'll lose it. Especially a good example would be last summer, where we had a lot of rain and then we had drought and then some rain and drought, and those plants would have died. Maintenance, keeping pine bark mulch or pine straw or something around the top to help with weed control, but not getting crazy with the mulch volcano, which looks a little bit kind of what's going on here. You got too much of that mulch that kind of comes up like that. You can get varmints that crawl in there like voles, and they will gnaw and kill a lot of those blueberry branches, the branches on the blueberries. They have very shallow roots that dry out fast, so make sure you're continually watering them, especially when they have fruit set, because those berries will fall off and you won't get any. So you have to make sure that they're getting abundant water during that time. And you don't want to plant too deep. Again, covering with net if that's something that you want to do. Make sure if you do that that it's over the entire bush so that birds can't get underneath that, or you're going to have to be doing a lot of bird rescuing. Pruning, they don't require a lot of pruning until they're a little bit older, so 4 to 6 feet tall, about 5 years old. So you're going to start, if you've got one that's really crazy and out of control, like you got on the left, you're going to take it down until where you just have a lot of airflow on the inside, and you'll start to notice that they'll be easier to pick. They won't be, 12 feet tall. You won't have to get a ladder to get to them. And then as they get older, you need to choose new upright growth from the roots, as I mentioned before, and that's going to replace your older branches. Renewal pruning. So sometimes you move somewhere and you've got some blueberry bushes and they just haven't been taken care of. So this is kind of where you're going to kind of visualize a 2 foot, give or take, area in diameter around that crown. You're going to get the largest canes. It's not really canes, but the largest branches, and you're going to remove them for air circulation. You're going to thin it out. You're not going to take it down to the bottom. You'll, regret that decision, I think. Remove those low spreading branches that touch the ground, and um, you don't want to do it too early because who knows why, but this will cause premature budding. So try to do it in December. That's the best time to do it after they drop too early, meaning like February-ish. So you can go in and you can do it either right before they start to produce. I usually tell this as a rule of thumb. January's too early for obvious reasons because we're going through a cold snap right now. And if you start to get the sap running, then that will kill that branch. So you don't want to do that. So usually February-ish, right before they start to break bud. All right, types. And here's some examples. You got southern highbush, lowbush, northern highbush, half high, and rabbiteye. So they don't all look a ton different, with the exception of maybe the rabbiteye. These particular types of blueberries can get really tall, like 12, 15 feet tall. Your other types are not that tall. So let's talk a little bit about each of those. So rabbit eyes, again, those are the kind that do really well here in Georgia. That UGA has come up with lots of new varieties, and they're constantly coming up with new ones. Very popular, does really well here in the Southeast. They prefer a 4 to 5.5 pH, but can tolerate pretty poor soil conditions. I've got them in a power line right of way at my house. They do great. And I don't have to do a lot to them other than just mulching them, providing fertilizer, and watering as necessary. The berries are going to be medium to large. You've got some like Titan, which are, I don't know, probably about the size of the end of your thumb. And they're going to have a little thicker skin compared with some of the high bush, which are the ones you'll get in the grocery store. Um, Choose varieties that, as I mentioned, early, mid, or late season, and that overlap on bloom time. That way you get that cross pollination. They're going to tolerate humidity and heat very well. They deal with drought pretty well. But again, if you've got a heavy berry load, you definitely need to irrigate during that time, or you will lose all your berries. Well, not all of them. And the quality drops because the plant will start to reabsorb some of the moisture from the berries. So they get real mealy and they're not great. So just keep that in mind again. Best suited in zone 7 to 9, which is exactly where we are, and they do well with hot summers and mild winters. We're not in a mild winter. You may see some dieback in some of them, but generally speaking, it's usually not a problem at this time period. It's going to be a problem as you move into March and April if we get another freeze. They're going to produce berries generally if you choose early all the way through late, and we don't have any late frosts, then you could conceivably get berries all the way from early June through September. So that's not every year, of course, but yeah, you could get a lot of berries. And just kind of keep in mind those carpenter bees and those blueberry bees. Those are almost the exclusive pollinators of these, unless you've got a hive around you where you'll get a lot of honeybees. And these are some varieties. And also remember, I do record this. I will post this at our Metro Master Gardener. So if you're interested in this, I also am happy to provide this as the slide deck as notes. That way you can see what these particular varieties are and their chill hours and when you can mid-season, early season, or late season if you want some of all. This is not an exclusive list. There are so many more here, over 50 varieties. Lots of places you can find them. UGA has a great publication on them. New ones coming out all the time. So just know this is not a complete list, but this is a good list. Northern highbush. So these are the most cultivated type of blueberries. So if you go to the store and you buy blueberries and they've come from somewhere not Florida or Georgia, that's probably what these are. So these are a little shorter. They grow 5 to 9 feet, and they do better in more temperate climates with moderate summers. So not what we have here. So Northeast, Northwest US. And here you're going to mulch them pretty heavily and cover them because they are a little bit more um, tender in the weather. There's a little bit more. So many are self-fertile, but obviously as goes with pretty much any type of fruit tree, if you have a self-fertile or self-fruitful variety, if you offer an additional plant for cross-fertilization, you will get a heavier fruit set. You will get more. Not necessary, but you will get more. Who doesn't want more blueberries? So make sure, again, all of these are going to have pretty acidic soil needs. So they're all pretty much across the same across the board. And again, most of them are also going to require most moist soils. And if you're not getting moist soils, you need to make sure that you're providing supplemental water. Here's some options for those early season. You can see the chill hours are in parentheses, 550, 1,000. Remember, here in Gwinnett County, we're like 800 to 1,000. So early season at 550, probably not a good idea, but always make sure that you are choosing varieties that do well in your local climate. Southern highbush, these are grown in Georgia. So this has been developed to do well in warmer climates. So they're kind of hybrids between the northern highbush and rabbiteyes, which rabbiteyes, again, do really well here. And they're more adapted to warm climates. So they're only going to grow 4 to 6 feet. You don't have to do a ton of hacking on them to keep them at a reasonable height. They ripen very early, so probably not a choice that we are going to want here in the Atlanta metro area. They're going to be suited for areas much further south. So chill hours between 200 and 500, which isn't much. Remember, I said around here it's going to be 750 to 1,900 somewhere. It just depends on the winter. We're in a transition zone here. So some years it may be more cold weather, some years not so much. It just kind of really depends. But southern Georgia all the way through the Piedmont area. So I would say probably the cutoff would be Macon or South Atlanta area. Again, some self-fertile, but cross fertilization will produce a heavier berry set. And, you know, who doesn't want more berries? Here's some ideas for varieties. We do occasionally have folks from the southern part of the state that watch, so these are some options for you. And you can see the chill hours there again in parentheses. Lowbush. So this is the original wild blueberry. These are the ones I picked in Canada during the summer. They are very tasty. So they're a distinct type, very unique characteristics. There aren't a lot of cultivars of these. Cultivars meaning created, genetically created, bred for whatever. They're very small. They're only like 1 to 2 feet in height. They're very low growing. So that initial slide I showed with the Native American um, woman there, the other picture that I showed where it was it looked like this big orange field. So those are all lowbush blueberries, and they turn a brilliant kind of rusty orangey color in the fall. But in the summertime, they produce yummy berries. So they're going to thrive in cooler climates up in the northern tier of the United States into Canada. They're going to require usually, I would say probably closer to 1,000 chill hours. So again, yeah, sometimes we get those here, but most times not. That's going to be further north where it's much more temperate. Um, they're very small berries. They are not big. I mean, I would say you were lucky if you got one the size of your pinky nail. They can be smaller than that, but they are very intense in flavor. These are different. They spread through underground rhizomes, so they're kind of creeping, and they form these really dense mats, which are different than what you would find with a rabbiteye or any of the other types. Um, so you could put these out, and if you lived up in Minnesota or Maine, you could put these out and have them grow in and around rocky areas, and then you could be able to harvest your blueberries. Half highs, so these are hybrids again between lowbush and northern highbush. And they do really well in kind of intermediate areas. They grow to about 2 to 4 feet. And so they're more compact and easier to deal with. They grow in zones 3 to 7, so in a temperate area. So you're probably talking like Kentucky, Tennessee, up to Ohio, and maybe Illinois and Wisconsin area, and kind of that band across there. And they're, again, self-pollinating, but cross-pollination will increase yield. So you can see a little picture of a field there. Again, not very tall at all. So you don't have to do much hacking at the top to keep them at a reasonable height. And you can see a few varieties there. So now let's jump into a couple different types of blueberries. You've got dwarf blueberries. So these can be any variety. As you see here, I've got a little chart. Some of them are northern highbush, some southern, some lowbush, and some rabbiteye. And so these just are great container plants. They're only going to grow from like 1 to 4 feet, perfect for small containers, patios, that kind of thing. So if you're stuck in a condo and you still want blueberries, you can, get some of these varieties and plant them in pots. Make sure you get your two that bloom at the same time and put them out there, and you can get blueberries in your own little, um, you know, garden that you have on your patio. Some of them are going to have really pretty fall colors, like peach sorbet. That's a northern highbush. Those leaves will turn pink and orange and really pretty greens. And then you've got sunshine blue that has kind of a burgundy foliage. So if you're looking for some kind of an ornamental aspect to it, you can get your berries and you can get the ornamental. Um, I You just have to kind of poke around. This isn't an extensive list, just like the others. There are others out there that are small that you can put in a container, but this is just a list to kind of get you started. Odd color. You probably noticed in the last slide that there were some pink berries that were here like pink. Um, there are some pink and so rabbiteye, you got pink lemonade, which is considered a container blueberry. They are pink. And there's a lot of benefits to that. Birds, let's say you've got a patio and you don't have very much space, but you want to grow some blueberries. Grow these particular blueberries because pink lemonade, birds are very keyed into that blue color. And so these don't ever turn blue. They stay this kind of pinky, reddish color. And so to a bird, that is not ripe. So you may end up with more fruit if you choose that. It's a little harder to tell when they're fully ripe, but still interesting and definitely worth a try. I don't know if we have them in our plant sale for sale, but occasionally we get them. I do have one planted out in my garden, and it's just getting to be about the size where I can start seeing some and actually harvesting some. So hopefully this year I'll get a few. Ornamentals. So these you can still eat them, don't worry. Ornamental is like loosely ornamental. So this is the nursery industry coming up with a good solution where folks want blueberries that they can put in their garden that maybe have good foliage color. Maybe they have different berry colors. So you've got blue suede, that's a southern highbush. So again, down in South Georgia and along the Gulf Coast. You see a picture of that there off to the left a little bit. Very, very deep, vivid blue, and pretty good sized berries as well. And then you have summer sunset. That's going to have really interesting reddish stems. So a little bit of fall and winter color. And then those berries are going to go from kind of like a green to a yellow to an orange to a red to a blue. So just vivid colors. And then pink lemonade, I already talked about that one. That one is going to ripen to a pink color. So the birds, it foils the birds. And then pink popcorn, that's another pink hybrid. Called swamp huckleberry, I guess, but it's going to have a really pretty fall foliage. All right, propagating. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. I'm most familiar with rabbiteye blueberries. Those things will sprout from the root system. You basically just nip the root and put it in a pot and it will grow. And you don't have to really do a whole lot. It does it for you. But you can also propagate them this way. So you're going to take softwood, late spring, early summer, and cut it diagonally, and then remove most of the leaves. You can see they've clipped and left only one or two leaves up at the top. Dip that in a rooting hormone and put it about a half an inch in an acidic type soil and keep it moist in kind of a shaded area. You can help it along if you're just doing a few by putting a plastic bag over it to kind of make a little mini greenhouse and just kind of, fertilize it with a kind of a dilute fertilizer every couple weeks. And then you might tug on it just a smidge to see if it started to root. When you feel that it's, not giving anymore, you probably got some good rooted ones. So you can see they're pretty easy to root. In addition to, you can just let your old plants send up suckers from the root system and then just nip the roots off. And then you have a whole nother plant and you can share with your friends and your neighbors or sell them, whichever. So some innovations. This was interesting as I was doing research to add to this. No chill and low chill blueberries. So remember, I said that most blueberries, like here in the northern part of Georgia, we're looking at 800 to 1,000 hours, chill hours. But obviously, you have some blueberries that come from Mexico, that come from South America, and you're probably scratching your head and you're like, well, there are some mountainous regions there, so maybe they're coming from there. Actually, no, some of the innovations and the breeding that they've done have actually gotten some of these chill hours down to less than 150. That's like Florida. So if you're interested and maybe you got a place down in Florida or you're listening from Florida, there are blueberry varieties that you can get that don't need very much in the way of chill hours at all. So that opens a whole new world to folks if you really love blueberries. You can grow them, where the palm trees do well. Biloxi is one that's a particular variety that does very well. It's a commercially grown variety, and that means that, they're obviously available all year round, but it makes it much easier now to source them. So diseases, you've got botrytis blight. That's a kind of a grayish mold, like you see in that photo down in the bottom right. I don't notice that a lot, but it thrives in like cool, wet, humid weather. So that's something you might see in spring. If you have a very wet spring that we've been dealing with, every so often we'll get those, you might notice that. And that's when the petals are going to kind of die and the mold will enter and you just don't get any fruit. So you got to make sure no watering overhead, keep only water from below, and that's pretty much any type of plant that you're watering. And you need to do some pruning to make sure there's good airflow. Mummyberry is one that most of us probably deal with, and it's an airborne fungus that gets on there and it causes those fruits and the leaves to shrivel and look mummified. You'll see that in the top there. And they drop to the ground, and then that fungus overwinters on those berries that have dropped to the ground, and then you get it the next year. So if you're familiar with a lot of the blights that tomatoes will get, this is the same thing in your blueberry plants. So the best thing to do, rake out all of that debris from underneath your plants and then put a new layer of mulch down, and that will help. Same thing for tomatoes. It'll help by keeping the spores down below where they can't splash back up onto the fruit and reinfect for the next year. Blueberry diseases, so alternaria fruit rot, it can infect any time, but generally dormant until the fruit matures, of course, right? Excuse me. And you're going to get some mold on there. Again, usually seen when it's really hot and humid, a lot of rain, that kind of thing. So removing that dead fruit and the branches and making sure you have good air circulation. Do you see the pattern here? You always want to make sure you're maintaining your plants for most effective fruit set. Armillaria root rot, that's going to be a disease that causes leaves and weakens that trunk. And you'll notice branch dieback. So even after the bush is cut down, it's still there in the roots and the debris. So you may not want to plant blueberries back there again. So you're going to have to get all of that out, including the roots and the stump, and don't plant any blueberries back there for at least 1 to 3 years. And honestly, with regards to disease, I usually tell folks just move it into a different area. Bacterial cankers, Pseudomonas, we see that. I have seen some of that on my own blueberries. Bacteria can get into the cut, so if you've been pruning, make sure you always want to, don't prune during a wet and warm and wet time. It's easier to spread all sorts of disease. That's why a lot of times we recommend doing it in winter because that's not as big an issue. You're going to notice lesions that are going to turn black or brown. And it will and can kill the plant. So as soon as you notice that, make sure you're sterilizing your pruners and clipping that out and getting rid of it. Try to plant newer cultivars that are resistant if that's a problem in your area. Again, prune during dry weather. Powdery mildew, this is a problem on all sorts of different plants around here. And that's mostly due to poor airflow, excessive water and humidity, and not having a plant that is going to be resistant. So just choose wisely. Pests, Japanese beetles, see a lot of these on there. They like to munch the leaves. So you can vacuum them off. I'm a fan. You can get, and I'm running late here, you can get a little hand vac and suck them off. That feels good sometimes. And then you've got cherry fruit worms. I don't see a lot of these, but They may be a problem in the southern part of the state. You've got the gall midge. They look like little mosquitoes and they can eat the shoot tips. So if you see browning and that kind of thing, that can be a problem. And then the root weevil. They do survive the winter. Typical weevil, and you can use some type like a winter rye or something like that, and then you can also remove them or suck them off with a little hand vac. Scale, that's a problem for a lot of plants. Again, these are neem oil, things like that. Apply that in August. Prune old wood to get the eggs and the adults that are no longer moving around. Flea beetles, we don't see these a ton, but you can get them. Um, excuse me. So you'll notice that when the leaves start getting munched on, and you can use foliar insecticides, neem oil, that kind of stuff. Almost done. So blueberries are a non-climacteric fruit, so they have to ripen on the vine, meaning if you pick them when they're green and put them in a bowl, they're not going to turn blue. You got to leave them on the plant for them to ripen. They're going to start producing fruit about 2 to 3 years after planting and will produce quite a bit. So 2 gallons per plant at maturity, and sometimes more. So if you take really good care of them and you water them and you fertilize them, they will sometimes produce more fruit for you. And they can live 15 to 20 years. So after about the 20th year, well, 15 to 20 years, you'll notice that the branches start to die back. That's when you're going to start choosing the new branches. So the sucker appearance that comes from the roots, start choosing what your new plants are going to be for the new renewal prune of that blueberry. And since rabbiteye blueberry plants don't produce root hairs for water and nutrients, they rely on mycorrhizal or a symbiotic fungi to do that for them. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I learned that. Anyway, so there were some questions about where my recordings show up, and you can see if you want to watch recorded sessions again because you missed something or you came in halfway through it. Our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, you can use that QR code there, take a screenshot, or use your mobile phone if you're watching on a laptop. And that'll take you to our page where I archive all of these recorded presentations. And if you want to sign up for additional classes, you've got the QR code on the top. That'll take you to our UGA Extension page where we have our classes and events. You can sign up there. I do know we also show up on our extension, the main extension website. I believe the link is published there. You don't have to register for classes. But if you want to, eventually we'll probably get around to sending something out to folks to let them know about new stuff that's out there. And we have all sorts of interesting other information on our website. You can reach me at either of those email addresses. I have both. I do tend to do most of my Q&A and stuff on the Gwinnett County one, and then leave the UGA email address for internal stuff, but you can reach me at either one. All right, so I think there were a few questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and see. All right, let me go up here and I will try to answer quickly since I know we're running a little bit late here. Let's see. If you have plants that are growing at different levels or heights, do you hedge or trim them after harvest to help them bush out more? I don't, so I'm going to go with rabbiteye blueberries because those are the ones that do the best here and the ones that we sell in our plant sale. And I don't hedge trim them. I'm going to go in and selectively trim out the taller suckers. Sometimes I don't because they do produce bigger, fatter, and juicier berries. But again, you need to keep your plants at a more manageable height. So just for the sake of keeping them I guess if let's say if you moved in and you had a bunch of berries that were really too tall, I would probably do a renewal prune. I would take off some of the higher branches and then I would thin out for better airflow. But I probably wouldn't take off too much, and I would allow 1 to 2 years more growth in there to kind of fill that out versus heading them or taking them down to maybe say 6 foot, because you're going to lose a lot of productivity on that bush. So I'm much more a fan of doing it gradually over a couple of years versus doing it all at once. Squirrels were destructive in my high bush blueberries last summer. Yes, they are. And breaking branches, I don't want to net because that kills the problem I can't avoid. Yeah, that's why I'm always a fan of just planting more. That way you end up having plentiful blueberries for the birds, for the squirrels, and also for you. So I think I've got, I don't know, probably 15 or 16 bushes out there, and they produce, I've got early all the way through late, and they produce tons of blueberries. And so I don't really care if the birds eat them, because I got plenty. They're out in a power line right of way, and typically the squirrels don't go out there because I've got a lot of birds of prey that will go out there, but they will go out and get in those blueberries, and I walk out there and the tree rats will jump out and run away. They don't care because they're hungry and they're eating. Raccoons are also an issue, so that may be what's breaking your branches. Those guys are a little bigger and can cause more damage. And there's not much you can do short of netting, which you don't want to do. I don't do that either. You can try some motion activated sprinklers around your blueberry bushes. That can work day and night. And deer generally don't bother blueberries too much, but you may have some better luck with squirrels and with raccoons at night if you set them so that they're just an ongoing, if they're always on. And that might be a help. That's a pretty good deterrent for a lot of different types of wildlife and domestic, like cats and some dogs and things like that. A few of my bushes have turned a rusted color. Are they dying? So it kind of depends on when. And if it's in the fall, that may be part of the fall color that that particular blueberry has. A lot of them will drop their leaves, and then you'll get new leaves in the spring. Like mine have done that. I still have some leaves, but not a ton. They'll leaf back out. So if they retain their leaves and they're rusty colored, that branch is probably dead, needs to be pruned out. So you may want to just wait at this point because it's kind of really super cold out. But if you go up to the leaves and they're crispy, that branch is probably dead. Uh, okay, don't worry about it if it started at 7. You can always check it out on my YouTube page. um, okay. A lot of 7 p.m. people. Yeah, 6 to 7. I typically do 2 webinars a month in the evening on Thursdays. They're always going to be the same time, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. Always, always, always. I occasionally will do lunch and learns, and those will always, always, always be Tuesdays at noon. So I'll do probably one of those a month on Tuesdays at noon, and then I do 2 webinars from 6 to 7 p.m. on Thursdays. I don't typically do them any other time. Uh, Diseases and blights cause harm to the plant's growth and survivability and create cosmetic issues, but do any of them pose a risk to humans' consumption? Not really, but like mummyberry, I personally don't want to eat gray, wrinkled berries that don't taste very good. Um, most of them are going to kill the branch. Excuse me. You're going to get fungal infection on the berry itself. You're probably not going to want to eat it. So that, kind of makes the decision for you. Copper fungicide for powdery mildew. Organic methods. Excuse me. Neem oil is a good one that has it's a good organic and it's got some fungicide properties to it. So if you have noticed that you have powdery mildew, it's probably because you need to do some heavier pruning to allow for better airflow. So if you see it, you can treat with neem. That's a good one, at least on first go round. And then if you have other questions, you can reach out. How large are the plants sold at the extension plant sale? That's a good question. They're all 1 gallon plants and they're rabbiteyes. So sometimes they're trade gallons, which is slightly smaller than a 1 gallon. But these are pretty good sized plants. I would say that each plant themselves are going to be probably 2 feet tall, 2.5 feet, and some of them have blueberries on them. So they're pretty healthy. We use Bottoms Nursery down in South Georgia to provide the plants for us. Let's see. If you have to use a herbicide for weeds, what pre-emergent and post-emergent do you recommend? I try to use cardboard and mulch. Good question. So, a pre-emergent is going to be better because what that's going to do is any seed that germinates, it's basically going to hit a wall and it's not going to be able to grow past that. So, a pre-emergent is going to be much better in this case and using a mulch. So using cardboard or a porous landscape fabric around your blueberry with mulch to help control weeds is going to be much better than using any type of a post-emergent. It really depends on the weed, but I don't recommend using Roundup or anything like that because that's going to kill your blueberry as well. We have problems. We get calls from people that have that witch's broom issue because their neighbor used Roundup and it drifted over and it hit their blueberry. And then, you basically lose the productivity of that blueberry. It might grow out of it, but you're probably going to be better off adding a new bush at that point. So try to not use any type of a post-emergent around your blueberries. Try to do some hand weeding or cover it up with cardboard or something, some solution that's not using a herbicide. Pruning them in winter for height control. Yes, but also remember that sometimes if you do it too early, they'll start to bud break early. That's just something that blueberries do. So, again, you don't want to do it too early. I wouldn't do it now, or you'll lose half your plants. Let's see. Any idea why last summer was a low production for Cobb County home blueberries? It really boils down to what the weather is in late winter, early spring. And so if you had a later frost and that particular variety of blueberry was blooming at that point, remember I said back that during particular stages in their bud break, they're more susceptible to colder temperatures and you can lose that particular variety. It's not going to produce anything for you because it happened to be blooming at that time. And that's when they're most susceptible to cold temperatures, is when that bloom is open and accepting pollination. And so maybe that particular, you had that cold snap and it just happened that was what caused issues then. That's why I try to encourage folks that if you can, try to plant early, mids, and lates. That way you're going to have, and remember, plant at least 2 of each. That way you're going to have berries that in case you lost some because they were blooming at the time, you still have others that you'll get fruit from. Oh, you're welcome. With all the free wood chips from the storm available, is that okay to use? Yes. So make sure there's not a lot of vegetative material in them, but if you can get some good, pine bark or hardwood chips that don't have a lot of greenery mixed in, then those are good. Use them on the top, just top dress them. You're not going to mix them into the soil, of course, and pull them away from the trunk of the blueberry for obvious reasons. You don't want voles coming in and nibbling on the trunk, but that's a good source. I use chip drop all the time. You get a lot of chips, so make sure either you've got neighbors that want to come over and get those extra chips, or you can use all of them because they give you like a dump truck load. But that's an excellent source of mulch for the top of your blueberries, and actually for your garden itself. So, I love chip drop. Um, Lots of mulch stories, yes. I have I had COVID the first time around, and I got a call the day I got diagnosed from Chip Drop saying they were coming to bring me a load of chips. So I had to answer the door and tell them where to dump them when I felt absolutely horrible, and I have long COVID. Um, so I had a lot of issues, and I couldn't do anything with my chips for 6 months. My husband hated me because it was in his parking space. We all have probably chip um, wood chip stories. Is it okay to mix mulch into soil as we build up a dip in the yard? Um, you can put just mulch there and it will gradually break down as it decomposes. Yeah, you can do that. Just know that whatever you plant in it, it's going to be a nitrogen sink. It's going to pull a lot of the nitrogen out of whatever is in and around it because as wood decomposes, um, it will the bacteria that are decomposing that mulch use a lot of nitrogen. So just make sure you're supplementing. You can get full tree trunks from Chip Drop too. Okay, I didn't realize that. Yeah, a lot of firewood if you want to do that. Is black dyed mulch okay? Um, so just know it'll probably absorb more heat, and I wouldn't don't use rubber mulch ever. But if you're going to use it, I would use it someplace not where you have a lot of plants, just because it's going to absorb heat. So if it's in sunlight, a lot of sunlight, it will get hotter. Yeah, I've had people that have sent me pictures of crepe myrtles that have died in little islands that they had black mulch, and it was in full sun and it was a hot summer, and it just didn't do very well, and it was mostly because it was black mulch. It was a heat sink. So if it's shade, I would say that's fine. And but I probably would think twice about using that in a island that gets full sun. Okay. Well, we're at like 20 after, 22 after. So if anybody else has any questions, you type them in real quick. Other than that, that's basically it. And I'm glad you all attended. It was very well attended. I had about 60 people. That's great. I would love to have that every year. We're at the North Atlanta Home Show. Starting tomorrow through Sunday, we're at booth 910. If anybody's interested, if it's cold and you want something to do, I believe it's like $8 or $9 to get in. Super cheap, but lots of cool stuff, and we'll be there. And I'd love to have some folks come and visit us. We'll have our master gardeners there to answer questions. We'll be doing Q&As, and I think I'm going to do my happy hydrangeas program that I have up on the Master Gardener, Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. That's a very popular one. So thanks again for attending, and hopefully we will see you soon at the next one. So take care. Bye-bye.